My name is Anthony Ray, and I am a genealogist.
Very good.
You should talk slower.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, because I do tend to talk pretty fast, right? I know.
All right. So you began your research when you were 12.
I started when I was 12, and it was a result of a passing in my family. And it just really piqued my interest seeing all these photos, hearing stories being told in the family, and that just really piqued my interest in where I came from. And then shortly after that, a cousin told me about how she was doing research, and she told me how I could start doing research on the family. And little by little, I started learning about research techniques, going to libraries, archives, things like that. And it wasn't until probably maybe 5 years later or so that I started coming down here to Riverside and doing research at the churches, at the archives, different libraries nearby, and pulling up not just names and dates, but uncovering the actual stories about the family. So that's been really interesting doing that.
So what actually was the first project that you worked on? What initiated all of this?
What initiated all of this as far as research goes?
What did you research in the beginning?
What I initially started researching was through the church records. So I contacted the Diocese of San Bernardino and spoke with Peter Bradley, who's become a good friend, and he invited me down, and I started looking through the Aguamanza church records, pulled up any people that were related, and then I would enter it into my database to create a family structure. And then from there, I would start researching other churches such as San Salvador and Colton, Our Lady of Guadalupe and Highgrove, St. Bernardine and San Bernardino, and there have been a couple other churches that I've been looking at recently, just where the family started to spread out here in Riverside.
What specifically were you looking for?
I call it blind researching, because I don't really know what I'm looking for. I just know that I might find something. And if there isn't something, that's evidence that they are not there. If there is something, obviously that's something. So I would find baptisms for people I didn't really know about, maybe deaths that I didn't know about, marriages. So I was piecing together the family, and I didn't even really know these people at the time. And so just taking all that allowed me to get this big picture of the family. And that has been very helpful when I start to find these stories in newspapers and in court records. I can say, okay, this is that person, and this was their cousin that they were suing, or this was their nephew that they were trying to evict out of the house, which was an actual story.
What would you say is your most interesting story?
There's an interesting story. There's a lot of interesting stories, actually. One involves the son of Lorenzo Trujillo, Julian Trujillo. He had married, I think, in Los Angeles. We don't know exactly. He didn't get married here in San Bernardino or in Aguamanza. And he wasn't married in La Plaza Church in LA, where a lot of the siblings were actually married when they first came to California. So I don't know exactly where he was married, but while doing research at the archive in San Bernardino, I pulled up a divorce record, and that was really interesting. I had no idea about it. And it looks like maybe his mother-in-law had some influence over his wife, and maybe she wanted some of the land that was in the family. It kind of looks like it could be that. And so that showed me, that told me what happened to the children, because I had no idea what happened to them. They just kind of disappeared. And I still don't know exactly what happened to them, but I know that the mother took them, and that's kind of it. So, and it's a very early divorce, 1860s-ish. So, at that time, that's not all that common to find a divorce in a Mexican community like that. Another interesting story, trying to think. I've got a lot of them. But apparently not a lot that I can remember real fast, right? What's another interesting story?
How did you come upon the story of the adobe? How did that start clicking into you?
So, Alex actually introduced me to a lot of things, and I remember my first encounter with the adobe and with the cemetery was, I think in 2005. My grandparents helped me a lot when I was doing research because I was too young to drive at the time. So they drove me down here, and we get to the cemetery, and it was locked because I didn't think to look online and say, to look and see what the hours were. So I show up, and it's locked, and I thought, oh, well, we'll go see the adobe. So we go to the adobe, and same thing, it's locked. So I had done a little bit of research after that to figure out, okay, how do I get in here? And with the Adobe, I was able to make some connections through the county and figured out, okay, I need to contact this person. And eventually I did get a little tour of it, and it was really special getting to visit the Adobe and to know that a lot of people were involved in the Adobe. It was built sometime after the flood in the 1860s. Antonio Trujillo, who was Lorenzo's son, built the Adobe, and his family lived there. But even though it was just his family that lived there, it was such an important home within the community. I think most Hispanic families would kind of identify with this, that you have one tío or one tía that has their house and everyone just goes there. It's just kind of like that place you go to in the family, and I'm thinking of people in my own family that we go to my tía's house or my tío's house. And I'm thinking that this was the house for the Trujillo family, because I know that even on my side of the family, my great-grandfather spent a lot of time there, lived just down the street from there. His siblings spent a lot of time there, and they lived down the street. So it was an important structure within the community for the family.
Do you know how it was laid out? Do you have any idea?
I'm not exactly sure, but most adobes were pretty standard. You walk in, usually they're very simple, very, what's the word I'm looking for? Very modest. So you walk into the main sala, and that's kind of like the living room, I guess you could say. And then usually you might have a room on one side, and maybe another room on the other side. Sometimes you might even have an attic. You might have people sleeping up there. But people didn't really spend a lot of time indoors like we do. And so there really wasn't a reason to have a large structure like that and to, have a lot of rooms. It was just there to maybe do some cooking and to sleep primarily. People spent their time outside on the ranch, maybe with the livestock or with maybe agriculture. So the Adobe wouldn't have been very large. There wouldn't have been a lot of rooms, things like that. Like I said, it would have probably been maybe 3 rooms and then maybe an attic where they would have put the children, something like that.
Do you know how many families lived on the site at one time?
Antonio was the original, he and his family were the original family, and then it went down to his son, Antonino, and his family lived there. After that, I'm not too sure what other families lived there. It might have been a few cousins that lived there, but those 2 families lived there probably the longest.
My family lived there.
There we go.
Antonino sold it to my great-grandfather, John Trujillo.
That's right. I was trying to remember. I thought it was John Trujillo, but I wasn't positive.
1918 for $10.
Because he moved, Antonino, so I'll back up just a little bit. Antonino lived there after, he grew up there, and so it was probably given over to him by his father, Antonio. About 1917, 1918, Antonino packed up his family and they moved to Highgrove, and that's when the Adobe would have been sold over to John Trujillo.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Have you actually started an ABQ and traced everything from there?
When I first started doing research on the family, when I started taking my research seriously, I did look through the church records. I'm actually looking through them again right now. I'm actually looking at Lorenzo's siblings, trying to reconstruct their families as well. So that was very important looking at those records, because that included Lorenzo's baptism, it included his marriage record, it showed his parents. We were able to go back to his parents, who were Juan Esteban Trujillo and Juliana Martin. And so it gave what's really neat about the New Mexican church records, or Spanish church records in general, is that they're very specific. And in this case, it told us exactly what the Spaniards, what class the Spaniards gave Lorenzo's parents. And for Juan, it was, I believe, Indio, which would have been Native American. And I believe for his mother, it was Coyota, which is a mixture of Indian and maybe another ethnic group. There were a lot of different classifications that the Spaniards gave to the people here in the New World. And so that helps us to know, okay, well, these Trujillos really aren't Spanish Trujillos, and they're not from this huge long line in New Mexico. They're from a long line in New Mexico, but they're an indigenous line. They're not a Spanish line. So those early records really help us to understand how Lorenzo grew up and what the social aspects were in his life.
From your research, can you tell us what you think his life may have been?
I think it would have been very interesting. The community that he was born into was kind of a community set up for people who were indigenous but grew up in Spanish culture. So if you think about that, that's a lot of different people now. Just think of a child who's maybe mixed ethnically. Maybe for me, my mom's side is English and German, Scottish, and this is where the Trujillo family comes in on my mom's side. But then on my dad's side, it's pretty much all Mexican and a little bit of African American. So for me, growing up, there was a lot of different mixed culture, and I think it would have been very similar for Lorenzo as well. His parents were probably adopted by Spanish families, and they would have grown up with Spanish customs, would have been baptized into the Catholic Church, but their DNA makeup was indigenous. And that's what Abiquiu was. It was this community of people who were all very similar in that background. They were known as Genizaros, and Lorenzo would have grown up with that. He would have grown up with the Spanish culture. He would have grown up, speaking Spanish. He would have grown up within the Catholic Church. He was baptized in the Catholic Church, married in the Catholic Church. And then when he came out here to California and settled Agua Mansa and La Placita, he was the one who was influential in getting the missionaries from San Gabriel to come to the Inland Empire and celebrate Mass, perform marriages, perform baptisms, to bury the dead. So he was very devout in his faith, and he also took an active interest within politics.